Dolly Parton showing some of her trademark class and humility again tonight, asking lawmakers in Tennessee to shelve plans to build a statue of her on the Capitol grounds in Nashville, saying it would be inappropriate with all that is going on in the world right now. Let's talk about that and some other statue ideas. Democratic strategist Kevin Walling and hate crime hoax author Wilfred Reilly. Gentlemen, welcome.
Glad to be here.
Hey, Mike, good to be with you.
Wilfred, what is there not to love about Dolly Parton? Legendary, entertainer, philanthropist, and more. Is it strange that this is even an issue?
Well, I mean, I obviously love Dolly Parton's music and charitable work, but I do think this is where we logically end up with some of this quote-unquote woke stuff. I mean, the narrative we're seeing is that people like Abe Lincoln, by no means just Confederate generals, were the worst sorts of bigot. So it's difficult to figure out who you can have out there. Dianne Feinstein's name was just taken off a major school. Even my hero MLK has been accused of things like issues with women. So the Dolly Parton statue bill was dead serious. And we've seen things like statues of BLM protesters go up for at least a few days across the pond in Britain. Obviously, as a center-right leaning guy, I think this is a bit of a joke. I mean, we need statues of Honest Abe and MLK, George Washington, if we're going to replace the Confederates. I don't think we need Faith Hill and Dolly Parton.
Kevin, if someone like Dolly Parton in this era is not worthy of a statue, who is?
Yeah, Mike, any time spent talking about Dolly Parton is time well spent, I think. But, you know, to Professor Reilly's point, and I think it's a good one, I think there's less controversy in terms of, you know, the sponsors of this bill. It's more Dolly Parton saying, I'm 75, I got a lot of life left. I don't want this statue just yet. And as the professor said, I mean, she's not just an incredible artist in terms of her music, but the philanthropy alone in terms of her childhood education, her contributing to the COVID vaccine, for example, Mike, as you well know and have reported about. I mean, this is an incredible woman. But again, I think there's less controversy in terms of the woke culture and more her just saying it's not time yet for a statue in her honor.
All right. Well, hopefully one day. Now to reparations talk in Congress. Here is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
If reparations had been implemented before COVID-19, we might not have had this definitive and deadening and deadly imbalance.
Wilfred, how do you respond?
Well, I think that there's a point here of sorts, but what she's saying, stripped of the academic or political language, is just more black people are poor because of past oppression and conflict. Obviously, there's nothing about black Americans that predisposes us to getting COVID. We're more likely to be in frontline jobs because we're more likely to be a younger, working class, urban population. You could argue that reparations might fix that to some extent, but there are many problems with reparations: who gets, who gives, who's next. So improving the schools in black communities, a dozen other things could fix that as well. I prefer some of those.
I want to play a clip from Congressman Burgess Owens.
I would ask that our Congresswoman Jackson Lee, instead of showing something 200 years ago, how about showing a picture of my dad? That generation of great men and women who really went through the toughest of time, grew up in the Depression, went through this true segregation, the KKK, and they did not let it stop them.
Kevin, your thoughts on his comment and on this reparations debate?
Yeah, it's an important conversation to have. I mean, Democrats have been trying to introduce this bill to at least study reparations in this country since 1989. And I think the professor makes a really good point in terms of not just access to education and frontline workers, but also, too, the fact that we see such disparities in terms of our health care. I think that's one of the most critical issues facing black and brown communities in terms of why we're seeing such a high rate of infection with COVID is not just education and economic circumstances, but health care and reaching these folks and now being able to vaccinate these folks is, I think, the critical issue. And we can have these conversations about reparations and how do we make up for the injustices of the past 200 years. That's an important conversation to have. But how do we tackle the crisis at hand for these communities that are disproportionately affected, I think, is a more critical conversation to be having at this very moment.
Okay, from Politico, what no one knows yet is how committed the White House is to the specific House legislative vehicle, which has been introduced in every Congress for more than 3 decades and would establish a commission of experts to study direct payments to African Americans. Could this be a major test for President Biden and Vice President Harris, Wilfred?
Well, I think what you're going to see, as the other panelist has mentioned, is probably something like a commission to study and produce a report that might lead to a follow-up commission. I don't think we're going to see reparations under a President Biden. This is a discussion that we should be having. But I mean, there are a lot of questions. Are we going to have reparations as well as continuing affirmative action is an obvious question. I mean, we've seen 2 to 3 million black immigrants into the USA over the past 50 years. Will these brothers, these African Americans, be recipients of reparations as well? Will I? I mean, I'm half Caucasian. So there's a lot that's going to have to be worked out. And I don't think we're going to see a Joe Biden reparations plan.
Kevin, I owe you some time next time. We're out of time. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
NASA rover Perseverance lands on Mars. Its first pictures from the Martian surface next.